Winter in medieval Europe was not merely a season of cold temperatures and shortened days. It was a formidable adversary that tested the limits of human endurance and ingenuity. For millions of people living between the 5th and 15th centuries, survival through the frozen months was not guaranteed. It required knowledge, preparation, and shelter that could withstand temperatures plummeting far below freezing, often for months at a time. Without the modern conveniences we take for granted today, central heating systems, insulated building materials, or even basic weather forecasting, medieval people faced winter with only their accumulated wisdom and the materials nature provided. A single mistake in construction, a poorly chosen location, or inadequate preparation could mean the difference between life and death for an entire family. The shelters they built were not simple structures thrown together for temporary protection. They were sophisticated survival systems, carefully engineered over generations to maximize warmth retention, minimize fuel consumption, and provide reliable protection against the brutal elements. Each design element, from the thickness of walls to the angle of the roof, served a specific purpose in the ongoing battle against the cold. Today, we will examine how medieval people transformed basic natural materials into thermal fortresses that enabled human survival in some of the harshest climates on Earth. Through archaeological evidence, historical records, and modern reconstruction experiments, we can now understand the remarkable engineering principles that made these ancient dwellings far more effective than their simple appearance might suggest. What do you think was the single most important factor in medieval winter survival? Location, construction materials, or heating systems? Share your thoughts as we explore each element. The selection of a building site was perhaps the most crucial decision a medieval family would make. This choice was not made casually or quickly. An incorrectly positioned dwelling could render even the finest construction methods useless, condemning its inhabitants to a miserable existence or death during the first severe winter. The landscape itself could serve as either a powerful protective ally or a deadly adversary, depending entirely on how well the builder understood its subtle characteristics. Medieval people possessed a profound, intuitive understanding of microclimates, those small-scale variations in temperature, wind exposure, and moisture levels that exist within relatively compact areas. This knowledge was not recorded in written texts or taught through formal instruction. It was accumulated slowly over centuries, passed down through oral tradition from parent to child, with each harsh winter serving as an unforgiving teacher that rewarded wisdom and punished errors with swift brutality. The most favored location was the middle section of a hillside with a southern or southeastern exposure. This position offered multiple critical advantages. A south-facing slope received maximum exposure to the winter sun, which in northern latitudes might provide only 6 to 8 hours of weak daylight during the darkest months. Every ray of sunshine that struck the dwelling's walls was precious, providing free thermal energy and helping to dry accumulated moisture. The hillside itself served as a natural barrier against the fierce northern winds that dominated winter weather patterns. Wind was far more than merely uncomfortable. It actively stripped heat from structures through both direct air penetration and convective cooling of exterior surfaces. By positioning dwellings on the protected side of hills, builders could reduce wind exposure by 60 to 70% compared to exposed locations, dramatically improving thermal performance and fuel efficiency. Consider the landscape surrounding your current home. Would its location have been judged suitable by medieval builders, or would they have rejected it as dangerous for winter habitation? Medieval builders developed 3 primary dwelling types, each carefully adapted to specific environmental conditions, available materials, and regional climate patterns. These were not arbitrary choices made from personal preference or aesthetic consideration.
No te
They were
preocupes, mi
reasoned
amor.
responses to the fundamental
Estamos bien.
challenge of maintaining human life through months of severe cold, with each design representing a different engineering
We
solution
have to
to the
stay
same
here until the
life-threatening
storm
problem.
passes.
The log hut, constructed entirely above ground from massive timber, was the most widespread dwelling type in regions where suitable forests were abundant. These structures were far more sophisticated than their simple appearance might suggest. The fundamental component was the log itself, selected from trees with trunks measuring at least 40 centimeters in diameter. These enormous logs were chosen not primarily for structural strength, though that was certainly important, but for their thermal mass, the capacity to absorb, store, and gradually release heat. During daylight hours, when the hearth fire burned actively, The thick wooden walls would slowly absorb thermal energy from the interior air. This heat penetrated deep into the wood fiber, warming the entire mass of the wall structure. At night, when fuel consumption was reduced to conserve precious firewood supplies, the walls would release this stored heat back into the living space. This thermal storage effect helped maintain relatively stable interior temperatures despite large fluctuations in heating output. The logs were fitted together with remarkable precision using corner notches cut where timbers crossed. Every gap between logs was meticulously sealed with moss, which possessed unique properties for this purpose. Moss did not decay. It expanded when moistened to seal gaps even more effectively, and it provided excellent insulation even in damp conditions. Additional sealing was provided by clay mixed with chopped straw and animal hair, pressed firmly into any remaining openings. In regions where timber was scarce, where winter temperatures reached extreme lows, or where concealment from raiders was necessary, medieval people employed an ingenious alternative, the dugout dwelling. These structures took full advantage of a fundamental geological principle. At depths of 1.5 to 2 meters below the surface, soil temperature remains relatively stable throughout the year, typically between 7 and 12 degrees Celsius, regardless of surface conditions. Construction began with excavation of a pit, typically 1.5 to 2 meters deep and 20 to 30 square meters in area sufficient space for a family of 4 to 6 people. This excavation was extraordinarily labor-intensive, requiring removal of 30 to 60 cubic meters of earth using only hand tools, often demanding several weeks of concentrated effort by the entire family, sometimes neighboring households. The walls required careful reinforcement to prevent collapse. Depending on available materials and soil characteristics, walls might be lined with wooden planks, logs set vertically, or stones fitted together without mortar. The roof structure had to support not only its own considerable weight, but also a substantial layer of earth covering typically 30 to 50 centimeters thick. This earth cap provided exceptional insulation, made the dwelling nearly invisible from any distance, and created a stable surface capable of supporting the weight of people and livestock walking above. Many regions, particularly throughout Eastern Europe, favored a compromise approach that combined advantages of both methods. A pit was excavated to a depth of 60 to 90 centimeters deep enough to gain thermal benefits from earth contact, but shallow enough to avoid the extensive labor and structural complications of full dugouts. Above this depression, log walls were constructed in the normal manner, creating a dwelling with its floor below ground level but most of its volume above ground. Each dwelling type represented a different engineering solution to winter survival. Based on the climate and resources in your region, which design do you think would have been most practical and effective? The walls, floors, and roofs of medieval dwellings were not merely structural elements holding the building together. They were complex, multi-layered systems designed to create an impermeable barrier against cold, wind, and moisture. Every aspect of construction reflected generations of accumulated knowledge about thermal performance and material properties, with each component serving a specific and essential purpose in the ongoing battle against winter's deadly cold. Wall thickness was of paramount importance in determining a dwelling's thermal performance. In the coldest regions, walls might measure 50 centimeters or more in thickness, far exceeding what was necessary for structural support alone. This extraordinary thickness served a crucial purpose, creating sufficient thermal mass to stabilize interior temperatures and providing enough insulation to slow heat loss to manageable levels. The concept of thermal mass is fundamental to understanding medieval construction techniques. A thin wall, regardless of its material composition, heats and cools rapidly, tracking outdoor temperature fluctuations with minimal delay. A thick wall, conversely, responds slowly to temperature changes. Cold requires many hours to penetrate through 50 centimeters of dense material, and during that time, the interior fire continuously replenishes lost heat. The massive wall functions as a thermal buffer, smoothing out rapid temperature variations and maintaining relative stability in the living space. The exterior wall surface required careful protection from weather penetration. A coating of clay mixed with sand and animal manure was applied to the outside, creating a layer several centimeters thick. As this mixture dried and hardened, it formed a weather-resistant shell that provided additional insulation, protected underlying materials from moisture damage, and deterred insects and rodents from penetrating the structure. Heat loss through the floor could easily equal or exceed heat loss through walls, because the ground beneath a dwelling remained cold throughout winter, creating a constant thermal drain. The earth floor was not simply compacted randomly. Builders would excavate a layer 10 to 15 centimeters deep and replace it with a carefully prepared mixture of clay, sand, and fine gravel. This mixture was moistened and then compacted through repeated trampling over several days, creating a surface nearly as hard as fired brick. More sophisticated designs incorporated an air gap beneath the floor surface. A shallow depression, perhaps 20 to 30 centimeters deep, was filled with dry organic material, leaves, moss, straw, or wood shavings. Over this insulating layer went the compacted clay floor. The air trapped within the organic fill provided significant insulation value, substantially reducing heat loss into the ground below. In the most advanced dwellings, wooden floors were installed above a crawl space filled with insulating materials, providing the best thermal performance and also creating valuable storage space for supplies requiring cool but frost-free conditions. The roof represented the most vulnerable point in the building envelope, exposed to wind, precipitation, and accumulated snow loads. Roof failure could be catastrophic, potentially collapsing onto inhabitants and destroying vital winter provisions. The structural framework consisted of heavy timber rafters, typically spaced 60 to 90 centimeters apart, capable of supporting not only the roof covering itself, but also the considerable weight of accumulated snow, which, in severe winters, could exceed several hundred kilograms per square meter. The roof slope was carefully calculated through centuries of trial and error. The optimal angle, typically between 45 and 55 degrees, was steep enough for efficient water drainage and snow shedding, while not so steep as to waste materials or present excessive surface area to wind forces. The roof covering consisted of multiple distinct layers, each serving a specific function. The innermost layer was birch bark, remarkably waterproof material that resisted decay. Over this went 20 to 30 centimeters of moss or straw for insulation. The outermost layer was often turf-living sod that continued to grow on the roof, with grass roots binding the soil together into an increasingly durable surface. A well-maintained turf roof could last 30 years or more, far exceeding the lifespan of many modern roofing materials. Medieval roofs often exceeded 50 centimeters in total thickness, providing insulation far superior to many modern buildings. Why do you think contemporary construction has moved away from such heavily insulated roof designs? At the physical and social center of every medieval winter dwelling stood the hearth. It was not merely a heating device or cooking appliance, but the literal heart of the home, the source of warmth, light, food preparation capability, and social gathering. The hearth's proper construction and reliable operation were matters of survival, for a failed heating system meant certain death when outdoor temperatures remained below freezing for months at a time. The simplest hearth was a fire pit, a depression in the floor lined with stones to contain flames and protect surrounding surfaces from ignition. Smoke from such primitive hearths escaped through a hole in the roof or through the doorway, making the interior uncomfortable and filling lungs with irritating fumes. Nevertheless, even this crude arrangement provided essential heat and the ability to prepare cooked food. The evolution toward more sophisticated heating systems represents one of medieval technology's greatest achievements. The pinnacle of this development was the masonry stove, particularly designs that appeared throughout northern and eastern Europe. These massive structures were built from stone, unfired brick, or clay, creating heat storage devices weighing 1 to 2 tons. The fundamental principle was elegant in its simplicity. Fire burned in a firebox, and hot combustion gases were forced through long, winding internal channels before finally exiting through a chimney. As hot gases traveled through these labyrinthine passages, thermal energy transferred continuously into the massive masonry structure. Because of the enormous thermal mass, the stove could be fired intensively for only 2 to 3 hours, heating the masonry to very high temperatures. Once the fire burned down to coals and was allowed to die, the stored heat would radiate into the living space for 18 to 24 hours, providing continuous warmth from a remarkably brief firing period. This efficiency was extraordinary, allowing families to heat their homes with far less fuel than would be required for a continuously burning open fire. The stove's surface became the warmest location in the dwelling. It was common practice to construct a sleeping platform on top of or immediately adjacent to the stove, providing an extremely warm sleeping area for the elderly, sick, or
This
young
is it,
children who
our
were most
forever home.
vulnerable to cold exposure. The
I can't
temperature of
believe we
these sleeping
actually did it.
platforms could
It's
reach 30 to
perfect.
35 degrees Celsius, a remarkable contrast to the rest of the room, which might maintain temperatures only 10 to 15 degrees above freezing. A medieval masonry stove could provide 18 to 24 hours of heat from just 2 to 3 hours of burning. Modern heating systems require continuous fuel consumption. What advantages and disadvantages do you see in each approach to maintaining winter warmth? The medieval winter dwelling, whether log hut, dugout, or hybrid design, represents a remarkable achievement of practical engineering. Constructed entirely from local materials using only hand tools, these structures provided reliable protection in climates that would kill an unprepared person within hours of exposure. Every element we have examined: site selection on protected hillsides, thick walls providing thermal mass, insulated floors preventing ground heat loss, multi-layered roofs shedding precipitation, and massive stoves storing heat for extended periods reflects generations of accumulated knowledge. This knowledge was not preserved in written documents or transmitted through formal education. It was embedded in practical traditions, passed from parent to child, from master craftsman to apprentice, through patient demonstration and careful oral instruction. Archaeological evidence and modern experimental reconstructions have demonstrated that a properly constructed medieval dwelling could maintain interior temperatures 25 to 30 degrees above exterior temperatures with surprisingly modest fuel consumption. This performance, achieved without any modern technology or manufactured materials, speaks to the genuine sophistication of these
Almost
traditional
ready.
designs. These shelters were not merely buildings providing basic protection from weather. They were, in the most literal and accurate sense, survival machines, carefully engineered systems that made sustained human life possible in conditions that would otherwise have proven swiftly lethal to our species. If you found these medieval survival techniques fascinating, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Which construction method do you believe was most ingenious? Consider subscribing to our channel to explore more about how our ancestors solved the fundamental challenges of survival. And don't forget to like this video if you learned something new today.